Here are 3 true scary stories from Reddit. The links to the stories are in the description below. Enjoy. Number 1. Hello guys, I'm a 21-year-old male from Vietnam. This story took place many years ago when I was around 7. In my town, people considered me to be very special because my mother was the first Vietnamese to marry a Korean. Everywhere I went, people always wanted to give me candy. Some even asked if I would go and have a meal with them. So one summer, I was heading out to buy a superhero DVD from a store that was only 1 kilometer away from my grandfather's house. After selecting the DVD and was starting to head back, an older man in his 30s came riding up on a motorcycle, calling my name. He asked if I wanted to get a ride back home. Being young and stupid, I accepted. I got on his bike and we drove off. When we were near my grandfather's house, he drove past it and asked me to come to his house and have lunch with him. Once again, I accepted. After about a 5-minute ride, we arrive at his house, which was very nice and huge. We sit down with his wife and 2 of their teenage sons. As I started to eat, they bring out some beer and ask if I want any. I say no because I don't drink beer. So instead, they bring me a Coke which already had the lid popped off. This was extremely weird because he had grabbed the Coke from a cupboard, not the refrigerator. Also, I could see that there was a white powdery substance at the bottom of the drink. Like I said, even though I was young and stupid, I found this to be very, very odd, and never touched the Coke during the course of the meal. Afterwards, the 2 sons ask if I want to play some Mario on the Nintendo with them. I immediately agree because I love playing Nintendo. The 2 sons then lead me upstairs to a dimly lit room. Right as I get to the doorway, I freeze in my tracks. It was an empty room with no light, no TV or bed. I really start to panic when I see dozens of syringes on the floor. I fly down the stairs and begin to run, when I'm immediately stopped by the mother, who's very thin, almost like a walking skeleton. She starts trying to drag me back up the stairs. I'm assuming they're trying to kidnap me and then sell me off to the Chinese across the border. I start kicking and screaming and am able to shove her downstairs. I run out of the house and start screaming at the top of my lungs. The husband begins chasing me on his motorcycle with a syringe in his hand. It's the middle of the day and people come rushing out their houses. Luckily, some men are running towards the husband and are able to kick him off the motorcycle. They toss aside the syringe and begin shouting and beating him. He didn't realize it, but he chose the wrong kid. My grandfather was ex-military who fought against the US and was well respected among the villagers. His 2 sons rush towards us, each with a sword in hand. Some guy picks me up and I dash back to my grandfather's house, which is opposite of a big police station. The young men then attack the sons with metal bars of their own. The police had already been alerted from an older lady screaming and were on their way. A group of policemen run right past me, armed with batons, pistols, and some even with AKs. The police start yelling for them to drop their weapons or they'll shoot. The sons were high off heroin and refused to surrender. Then, a marksman fired some shots and was able to shoot the weapons from their hands. I don't know what happened next because I was already in my mom's arms crying like a little baby. After the incident, I have never accepted any ride or meals from a stranger. Apparently, the family were drug addicts and drug dealers for years. The husband chose poorly in trying to kidnap a well-known kid, whose grandfather's house was right next to a police station. He ended up dying in jail 5 years ago due to complications from AIDS. As for the rest of the family, they're still sitting in jail. Number 2. Here is some background. This story happened about 10 years ago in Tampa Bay, Florida, around when I was 10. It was a while ago, so some details may be a little fuzzy. I was in my backyard tossing around a baseball when I accidentally threw it into my neighbor's yard. Cliché, I know. I don't remember where my parents were at the time and decided to go to the neighbor's house by myself. This guy didn't go out much and was generally creepy towards me and my friends, but no one had given it a second thought. He also had a wife and daughter, but no one had seen them in forever or knew where they were. At least that's what my parents told me when I had asked about them recently. To get to the point, this guy was the neighborhood weirdo, the oddball. I headed over, and when I knocked on the door, he seemed to answer it instantly and invited me inside for lunch. I declined the lunch offer as politely as a 10-year-old could and explained the situation to him. He nodded and then asked me if I wanted a drink. I again said no. I walked inside and he shut the door behind me. Red flags hadn't gone off yet in my feeble child mind, and we walked to the backyard. As we passed a set of stairs, I heard a groan coming from one of the bedrooms upstairs. I started to slow down and look, but he was right behind me, pushing me along. When I asked him what the noise was, his face seemed to change from a happy to a mad one. He opened the sliding doors to the backyard and pointed, telling me that my ball was in the corner near some shrubs. He said I needed to get it because I was small enough to crawl in the shrubs and reach the ball. As I walked up to them, I happened to turn around and saw my ball by the doors, and also saw the man pulling out a roll of tape. Alarm bells started ringing and I booked it, running as fast as I could. I got past him, picked up the ball, and threw open the sliding glass doors. As I passed the stairs on my way out, I thought I saw a frail, sickly child coming down them. I ran even harder, threw open the front door, and ran home. I never mentioned any of it to my parents, and we happened to move out the next week. So to my creepy neighbor that probably wanted to rape me, let's not meet again. Number 3. I was a 6-year-old girl and it was moving day. My father, a Navy veteran, had been relocated to Honolulu, Hawaii, a relatively safe place for kids where most crimes of any type happened either in the sun's shadow or by the dim light of the moon. My childish imagination pictured streets covered in sand, shells decorating the walls of shops and houses, water flowing from open windows and doors as the houses were filled with water. I thought of people growing gills and scales across their backs. I thought of school being shared with starfish and dolphins, and our teachers were sharks and plankton. It sounded beautiful, a truly magical place to the child me. Even when I look back at it how I imagined it would be like, I still wish it was. Fast forward to 3 months later. It's been a month since we had moved into a neighborhood that houses Navy families. The school my sister and I went to was also for military families, and my mom got a job as a cashier there. I was outside by myself messing around with a box full of torn up palm leaves and plumera lei flowers that I had picked from the tree in my front yard. My mom was inside watching TV. My sister was down a couple blocks playing with her new friends, and my dad was serving overseas at the time. I remember it was mid-morning, the sun shining brightly overhead, with a few clouds here and there. I noticed really that no other people were outside enjoying the weather, and there was just a few cars passing by. I was sitting in the middle of the grass next to the plumera lei tree, just 30 or so feet from my front door. Our house was the type that you could enter from the garage, which led straight into the kitchen. Straight down the hall is the front door, and to the left the living room, and to the right the dining room. Upstairs were 3 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. I was always fascinated with cars, so as the cars kept passing by, I kept watching. During this time of car gazing, a silver van with heavily tinted windows pulled up next to the mailboxes. Now my attention was drawn to the van, and a woman in her early 20s opened the passenger side door and got out. She was decent looking, red camisole and blue jeans. The thing that struck me as odd was that she had no shoes or socks. Yes, I know people didn't need to wear shoes everywhere, every day, but even I wore shoes that day. Both the ground and the grass were blazing hot. I figured she was getting her mail, so I looked away and backed down at my torn up palm leaves. I was tearing off each individual leaf when I suddenly felt a tap on top of my head. Instinctively, I ducked my head and turned around to see the woman 3 feet away from me, smiling at me with her row of pearly whites. "I see you like flowers." Her voice sounded childish, like she was talking to a baby and not a 6-year-old. I wasn't at all scared, and I was taught to be polite, so I just shook my head. "Yes." Her smile looked almost demonic. "Would you like to come see my garden, sweetie?" She sounded so sincere. I remember so clearly that I was about to say yes, when I heard a little voice in my head scream no. A red flag went off in my head, and I mumbled a quiet and nervous, "No, but thank you." I remember how her smile dropped. It was quick and easy, like a row of dominoes, like her smile wasn't even an actual smile. It scared me. "Would you like to repeat that?" She seemed to scold me, looking at me with a face that only I can explain as emotionless. I gathered up the small courage I had and firmly said, "No, thank you." She sneered, then placed her hands around my wrist. "I know you will love it there." She then yanked me forward and started walking towards the van. I whimpered at the pain in my wrist and pulled away from her as hard as I could, but she kept walking. Red flags were still going off, fear replaced with horror. I had a waterfall of tears coming from my eyes and whispers and silent unheard stops coming out of my mouth. She just kept walking, making no sound. The only sound was my whimpers and shoes being dragged on the grass. She hadn't worn shoes, so she could be silent and sneak right up on me. She and whomever else was in the van had planned this whole thing out. I was a smart kid for a 6-year-old, and my mom had placed me and my sister in karate at a young age to teach us self-defense. My dad also has taught us self-defense and how to get out of someone's grip. So my 6-year-old mind, by some miracle, recalled my dad's demonstration on how to twist your arm and pull to get out of a tight grip. I twisted my arm towards her body, then shoved my arm backwards towards me. As if a miracle, my arm tore out of her grip. The woman stood in shock before trying to grab my wrist again. I stumbled back, fear in my eyes. I couldn't scream or anything. My throat was sore and dry. I couldn't make out a word. I was so scared. I pivoted and ran towards my house as fast as my skinny little legs could carry me. I couldn't tell if the crazy bitch was behind me or not. I couldn't hear her, and I was so scared to look behind me. I was about 20 or so feet from the door when the woman grabbed a hold of my hair. My hair had never been cut. It was down to my mid-back and easy to grab. I silently screamed, my throat clogging up my every word. Fear had engulfed me completely to the point of my teeth chattering. I was shaking so badly the woman had to grab a whole handful of my hair to pull me along with her. I could barely see what was happening, but I could feel it all. I could hear the woman's ragged breath and growls deep in her throat. She was mumbling to herself words I couldn't understand. I finally couldn't take the pain any longer. My legs were scratched from the pulling, my wrists bruised, and my head pounding. I opened my mouth and let out a scream. Nothing. You could hear nothing but a whistle of air from my throat. At this point, I thrashed and practically tore the hair from my scalp as I ran forward. I was once again out of her grip and running straight towards my door. By another miracle, I made it 10 feet away from the door, in which I was right in front of my living room window. I knew the door was locked, as we lock it no matter what. So I pounded on the window, crying, silently screaming for my mom. She wasn't in the living room, but in the kitchen. I could see her peek her head around the corner. The woman wrapped her hand around my mouth and chest. She lifted me up and started bolting towards the van. I bit her hand, I kicked, I punched and wrestled in her arms, but she just kept running, and that's when I heard my mother. I have never heard her scream so loudly in my life than she did that day. Even to this day, I could still hear my mom scream every time I look back at this horrifying memory. How broken she sounded, like she was being killed or watching her child be taken away, and that was happening right in front of her. My mom's scream terrified the woman as she jumped and threw me to the grass. I balled up, finally letting out a scream of pure, solid pain. The rest was fuzzy. I could hear footsteps rushing towards me and the screech of tires. I remember seeing my mother's face. She smiled the most biggest smile I had ever seen. Her eyes were red with tears. The next thing I know, I'm talking to the police, shaking on my mom's lap. They never caught the woman. My description was too broad and could match up to any number of people. The van was found hours after the first search, as it was left on the side of the road. They found duffel bags, ropes, a muzzle, and condoms in the back just scattered about. I was traumatized for years. I feared every car that passed that mailbox. I ran inside once a car stopped at the mailboxes. We had cut my hair to my shoulders and we kept the door unlocked whenever me or my sister played outside. It would be cliché if I said I saw that woman again, but I didn't. I never saw her ever again, not once. She wasn't even on the news. It was like she never existed. The after effect of that incident kept me safe, but not safe enough. But that's for another story. So woman who wanted me to see their garden, let's not meet again. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to those who have subscribed. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.